Hey folks!
Hej allihopa!
Welcome to another video.
Today we are rounding out what we read and hauled in the month of July.
July.
I don't know, we're in August now. Last month is completely forgotten about.
Yes, zipped from the mind.
Yes.
Pretty big month for us, I think.
I read 14 books.
I think my most productive month this year.
Same. The first book I read this month was You're the One That I Want by Simon James Green. I have read two of his previous books in the past. I read Heartbreak Boys last year, and the year before that I read Alice in Wonderland, I think it's called. And I will say, he's getting better and better as an author. I thought this was really cute. This is about Freddie, who kind of just goes by school. No one knows who he is. Basically, he's a nobody. And he has two friends, and then he has this encounter at his mom's production party or something. His mom is like a producer for a TV show, and he has this encounter with a boy there, and it goes really badly, and he's like, screw this. From now on, it's gonna be, I will say yes to everything, and I will become someone at school. I just wanna, do things. So he basically says yes to doing the musical at the school, and they're setting up Grease. And there's a new boy at school who he's really into, and it goes from there. I thought this was really cute. I laughed a lot while reading this. The only thing I will say, I thought that something that happens towards the end could have happened a little bit earlier. I thought it could have been interwoven a little bit better than it was. But other than that, I think it was really good. I recommend this. This is more like a lower young adult book, kind of. So if you're like me, who's 30 years old, just be aware of that. Like, this feels a little bit younger, but it still was really cute, and recommend.
The first book I read was Pain is Really Strange by Steve Haynes. This was a recommendation from my osteopath because I have a lot of pain in my body, and he was like, this might help you kind of change perspective about what your pain is and how it works in your body. It doesn't offer a lot of solutions though, and it's really beautifully illustrated by Sophie Standing. So it's like almost like a graphic novel, except it's 32 pages long. So really easy read and just beautiful, beautiful illustrations. And it just kind of talks about what's happening in your body when you're experiencing pain, and also how pain is linked to like your mental state as well. And sometimes you could have something wrong with your body, but it doesn't hurt, and then nothing's wrong with your body and it does hurt. It's kind of a good reading level for people who are not super medically up there, but then it has sources for, like, if you actually are interested in reading the medical articles or a book about it, then it has those sources, so you can go look for them if you want.
So the next book I read, which I have mentioned previously, is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I read this as the Illumicrate read-along. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars, mainly because I thought it was really beautifully written. I did think nothing really happened in the book, kind of. It felt like some of the stuff was just like, okay, like, when are we getting to some stuff? But overall, I thought all the characters, because it's like multiple POV, I thought you could really understand where all the characters came from, regardless if you like agreed or disagreed with them. The only character that I had a hard time was like Priya. She felt very like, she kind of just like, okay, I'll do this. Oh no, I'll do this. And she kind of didn't really have opinions on her own, and that kind of annoyed me a little bit because she's like one of the main characters. She was just kind of did what she was told sometimes, I felt like. But other than that, like, the writing is really beautiful. I did end up listening to a lot of this on audiobook though, because I was falling behind and it's quite big. So I thought if I actually read while listening to the audiobook, I'll pick up some steam. I recommend if you want like some fantasy that is sapphic. Also really nice cover.
The next book I read is Nepantla, an anthology for queer poets of color, edited by Christopher Soto. I really, really enjoyed this. It was my top book of the month.
Oh wow.
A lot of both kind of classic, if you could really call them that, poets of color who are also queer, and then also a lot of really new modern ones, contemporary ones. So it was kind of a good mix. I kind of struggled, I think, with how the book was structured. It just seemed to be a little random what the order was. They weren't organized by chronology or by theme. So you'd be reading things and it was just kind of like, oh, I guess this is what I'm reading now. I think that's probably like my only real criticism of it, was that I wasn't sure how the anthology was created. Because I think a lot of the people, like a lot of the contemporary writers who are featured in this, were involved with the publication in some way. So then it was kind of like, oh, were they just like friends and that's why they're included? And then there's like people like Audre Lorde, who obviously should be included, who were also included because they're famous, but like, did they miss out on a bunch of other people who maybe didn't know the right people? So many new people for me to follow up on and discover more.
Also, the cover's really nice. Yeah. The next book I read was Playing in the Palace by Paul Rudnick. This follows Carter. I don't remember anyone's names. Like, once I finish it, I'm like done. And he is like an event planner, kind of, coordinator. And at one of these events, he meets the Prince of England, Edgar. The prince is openly gay, and he is also the crown prince, by the way. And they kind of have like this insta-love moment, and then they kind of start pursuing a relationship together, which comes with its hurdles, obviously. I didn't really like this book. I thought it was going to be really good. The cover is beautiful, like, it sounds like Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I was like, yes, 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 let's go. But it was just like a lot of stuff where I was just like, what's going on? It felt like they were like on like, I don't know, some outing, and they were talking as if they had been dating for like a year, where it's like, actually it was like 2 weeks. I was like, what's happening? Like, am I missing something? Am I missing pages? I felt like there was stuff that had been taken out, or the author had just decided not to include it. It was just very strange. Their relationship super quick, and I was like, I don't really think, because it didn't feel realistic, and it didn't feel like the characters, I don't know, it was just very strange. And then there was a lot of stuff, as someone who lives in England, that was just like, this makes no sense. Like, why would the prince live at Buckingham Palace when his grandma already lives there, who is the queen? Like, he would live in another palace, like Kensington Palace, I think he would live in. Like,
they have a lot of castles, let's just say that.
Yeah.
They own a lot of
They
different
don't have
properties.
to live together. They would live separately. Like,
also, don't they drive
from the airport.
Yeah.
And he has like the window down. He's like, oh, look at all these like landmarks. I'm like, are you driving from Heathrow? There's no landmarks there. Like, I'm sorry to everyone who lives next to Heathrow Airport, but like, there's nothing there. Anyway, and stuff like that was just like annoying. And then there was like a lot of things happening that I just thought was a little bit too much. Not my cup of tea, basically. At least it wasn't very long. It's less than 300 pages. So it was very quick to read. Also, sometimes I felt like the main character was just very rude about things, and he would just go on tangents, and I'm like, this is not moving the plot forward. So like, if I would edit out all his tangents on things, this book would be like 100 pages probably. The premise has a lot of potential. Like, it's a bit different obviously from Red, White, and Royal Blue. And obviously it's interesting to explore the theme of like an openly queer monarch. This was not how you should have done it, basically. Anyway, 2 stars for me, I think.
The next book I read was The Colors of Love, Memories of Young Love, Memories of Life Lived by Leon Del Ciervo. I did not enjoy this. I think I got it from Gaze the Word. It was just like very cheap, and I just got it. It's about a guy who goes on holiday and just has sex with like younger men. Like, that's what the poetry is about. A lot of it's like super narrative. It's like, I walked into the room and so who I'd met before was there, and he had brought a friend, and we spent a passionate night together, and then the next morning his servant brought us tea. And I'm like, what? Is this what people read? As like a person on the asexual spectrum, it was wild. I read it very quickly because I kind of just wanted to get it done with. I didn't like this, and they're all called like Gilberto, a dark star, and I'm just kind of like, what? It almost felt like sex tourism, which I personally think is a little iffy. He was like going on holiday to have sex with younger men who he sometimes paid. The ethics of it were iffy for me, and I didn't think any of the poetry was very good. Yeah, it took me an hour to read this basically, and it was an hour that I wasted.
The next book I read was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. This is a book that's been talked a lot about like on BookTube and Twitter and stuff. Mainly because people always criticize this book and I'm like, but why? I thought it was okay. It was quite a standard young adult fantasy, kind of like two people who have to work together to overcome something. Perfectly fine. I didn't have a problem with it. I might check out the second book because like the romance aspect was about to start. And I think it's like just a duology. I don't remember the characters' names. It was a little bit forgettable in that sense, where it's like nothing really stuck with me. I don't really remember the story that much, but overall, like when I was listening to it, I liked it also because it's dual POV. They have in the audiobook there's like two narrators for each character. Oh, thank you. I love when you do that.
The next book I read was La Demeure Mystérieuse by Maurice Leblanc. This is another one of the Arsène Lupin books. I read quite a few. I actually finished the whole series this month, so finally I'll stop talking about them. No, but so this is basically a crime is committed and they figure out where the house is, except the people who live in the house have no idea. They're like, it's not possible that this crime was committed here because we were here and this didn't happen. But the people who were abducted and brought to the house recognize all of the furnishings. So it's like mysterious. How did this happen? And I can spoil it for you if you want. There's a second house. And it's got identical furnishings because some rich guy was super horny and he had his wife and his mistress. And he loved his house so much that he had with his wife that he built a second house that was identical so that he could be there with his mistress and feel at home. And then there's like, and the reason that they're trying to frame the people who own the original house is that there's like a blood feud between the mistress and the wife. Who has the time? The people from the original house, one of their parents was accused of collaborating with the Germans, and then like a generation before he was arrested for murder, and a generation before that he was arrested for like espionage or something, and they've all been set up every time. It was never actually them who committed the crime. It was okay. I think I gave it 3 stars. Yeah, and of course Arsène Lupin insinuates himself in it because he's somehow simultaneously wooing the 2 women who get kidnapped. That's how he's like in this. He was like kind of going out with the first one, and there's like diamonds that get stolen, and then the second one gets kidnapped as well, and he was also kind of into her. And I'm just like, you need to keep it in your pants, sir.
The next book I read was The Summer of Everything by Julian Winters. This follows Wes. It's like a slacker, and it's like the summer before he's going off to university. So he and his family live on the top, and then underneath is like a bookshop. And his mom is also a young adult writer, which was apparently very important to the plot. And then Wes has a massive crush on his best friend, and he doesn't really know what to do with that. He wants to say to the best friend that he likes him, but obviously with the stress of everything. Oh, and the bookshop is closing down. I thought this was okay in the beginning and a little bit throughout the book. Obviously they talk about Wes's mom, who is like a young adult writer, kind of like Cassandra Clare type of thing, where she has like this big book series of paranormal romances. I feel like that idea was something that was going to be bigger in the book, but ended up being edited out because it didn't really add anything. I thought that his mom was a writer, like obviously she can house that as a job, but she wasn't even in the book because she and the dad was like on holiday in Italy. I did think that like kind of found family aspect of this book was really sweet, because like all the people who work in the bookshop kind of is like, oh, we need to like raise money in order to save the bookshop so it doesn't close down, and I thought that was really sweet. And I kind of like the aspect of like not knowing if you want to go to university or not, and kind of having that eternal debate, like, is it worth it? What do I want to study? Because that feels very realistic. Because usually people are like, oh, I'm going to go to university, it's going to be great, I already know what I want to be. But like in actuality, you probably don't know what you necessarily want to study because you're like a 17, 18-year-old who...
You are.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, but I took like 2 years off and then I studied, which was not smart, but you know.
Well, I didn't take 2 years off, and what did that bring me that you don't have?
Exactly. So I thought that was really what the book had going for it. Other than that, it was fine. I kind of like the romance aspect as well. It's a little bit like forgettable. I'm kind of like, what happened in the book? Also, this is just from my own personal preferences, but like Wes's family is obviously quite rich because his mom is obviously a very successful author and his dad has like some successful restaurants. And I thought that wasn't really talked about that much. Like, he gets money from his parents so he can like stay in the flat by himself. Yes, you're privileged. Anyway, that was just like something that I didn't really necessarily like that much.
The next book I read was Too Black, Too Strong by Benjamin Zephaniah. I really liked this. This book came out in 2001, and unfortunately the exact same talking points that he has about like blackness in Britain, like black identity, and the kind of really awful anti-blackness that exists in Britain, there, like, some of this could have been written like this past year. And that is a horrifying thought. You know, this book is 20 years old. Like, how is that still happening? But I thought these were pretty good. There were some where I really was like, wow, yes, or that I really connected with, or made me think a lot. So I would recommend this. It's a pretty quick read, it's pretty short, and it's really thoughtful and an interesting perspective. I don't really have that much to say, it was just good.
And the next book I read was She's Too Pretty to Burn by Wendy Hurd. This follows Mick, she's like a swimmer, but she's kind of struggling to find money. She wants to go off to college far away from where she lives because she doesn't get on with her mom. And then she meets Veronica at this party, and they have kind of like a little bit of a romance. And then Veronica takes the pictures of Mick, even though Mick hates having her picture taken. And the photo gets like well-spread fame on like in the internet basically. And then Veronica has like a friend who's like an underground artist sort of, who does like disruptive art. And one of them includes like setting fire to like a forest, and then I don't know, it's just very, basically he wants to disrupt this politician and yeah, being really horrible, and ends up basically starting a wildfire. Anyway, it was not very good. As you can maybe tell, I'm like struggling to like think about it, and I think one of the reasons is like the choices that the characters made. I was like, well, that's on you. Like like I have no sympathy for some of these character choices that they make. And then I really thought that like the first bit of like Veronica and Mick's relationship I thought was kind of sweet, but then they were just being very rude and like weird to each other. I was like, what are you doing? Veronica in particular is very selfish. I mean, Mick is too. And then the ending, I was like, what? Like, I was just like, I mean, some of it was hinted at a little bit, but I just thought it really came from like nowhere, because the character who ends up being like the main villain, like, he was rude throughout the book, but like the ending, I was just like, what? I was like laughing, like, what? I can like, it was very strange. This was a very strange book. I would not recommend reading this. The cover is beautiful, but yeah, this is a strange book.
The next book I read was La Bariva by Maurice Leblanc, another Arsène Lupin book. To be honest, this book was okay. One of his policeman friends calls him up and is like, do you want to come hang out with me? And he's like, we're not like really friends, but okay. So he goes there, and turns out there's been like a bunch of people who are murdered at this like house next to where the policeman is staying. And everyone's running around trying to figure out who it is, and there's this woman goes missing. Turns out she went to Arsène Lupin's house in Paris where he was, and he like received the call about the murders while she was there, so she heard them, and it's her family, and it's all like a whole thing. And then the ending was really unsatisfying. Turns out all of the murders were really improbable accidents. Like,
she tripped and fell on her shears.
She tripped and fell off of a ladder. Another guy was a professional. It'll come to me immediately after. But anyway, so he's like professional. He cuts down trees for a living, and he gets crushed by a tree. And another time, a guy is climbing up the side of a tower, and everyone thinks that he gets shot. But instead what happens is that there was a hot air balloon above him, and they dropped some of their stuff to like... This is a thing that I don't understand about hot air balloons. When you lose weight, you're literally throwing stuff overboard. And obviously you could kill someone. And that's what happens in this book. So like a ladder, they like throw a ladder, like a rope ladder, and it falls on the tower in such a way that you can climb the side of the tower, and then something else falls and he dies from that. It just didn't make any sense. And there's like, it's basically like inheritance fraud is what's happening at the same time. So you're all like, oh, they're being murdered by the guy who's going to inherit, but actually he didn't murder anyone, and it just didn't make any sense. So I don't think I could really recommend this. I think I gave it 3 stars anyway, because it was better than some of the other books that I've read from the series. And then the policeman had been sleeping with the cook from this like fancy house, and turns out she was married to someone else. It was like, I just didn't really understand why a lot of things happened, and all of it just was like, really? That's what you're going with?
The next book I read or listened to is also called You're the One That I Want by Joanna Fletcher. Basically, I found this as I was looking at the audio apps from my local library, and I found this and it sounded kind of cute. This is about 3 friends, 2 boys and a girl, who grew up together. So you follow 2 of their perspectives, Ben and whatever her name was. It's not important. It starts off with the girl marrying the other boy, Robert. I can't remember the girl's name.
Well, you can just call her the girl, I guess.
Yes.
And we'll add her name here.
And then you follow them from age of like 9, I think, up until the day of the wedding. And basically Ben has this massive crush on her, and he's kind of like planning on telling her when they're teenagers, but then the girl and Robert kind of end up falling for each other, and then it's kind of like this kind of one-sided love. But then there's some moments when she's maybe thinking of like going with him instead, and so on. It was kind of sweet. I mean, obviously, if they all had lived in a polyamorous relationship, none of this would have been a problem. However, that obviously is not what the book's about. But I thought it was kind of sweet. I thought some of the choices maybe was a little questionable at times. And I thought, like, I kind of wish Robert would have been more of a person in the book, because he's obviously like the 3rd best friend or whatever. But because we don't really get his perspective, we get his perspective, I think, in between some of the chapters where he's like doing like a speech at the wedding. But that's not enough to like give you an impression of who he is, because it's just like a speech and not like inner thoughts or anything. So I kind of wish that maybe one chapter here and there could have been from his perspective, or just have him be more present as a person, because like we get it, she's like in love with him and he seems like a really nice guy and he's supposed to be very loyal and like a gentleman basically, but like I didn't really feel that. I didn't really know why she went with him and not with Ben, for instance. Yeah, I thought also it was interesting, like, when they were more adults and when Ben is still kind of having a crush on him, on her, and how it can be really, like, destructive to him to have those feelings, and maybe, like, realizing that he needs to let it go. for like everyone's sake. But yeah, it was kind of interesting. But obviously a bit bittersweet ending, but you know, also quite nice. But it also had like really awkward like epilogue where they're like older and they have children. Kind of like it reminded me of like the epilogue in Harry Potter, and I was like, ugh. And like it could have just ended somewhere else. Like I didn't have to know that they had like kids and all that. I would have rather had like the epilogue be towards the end of the wedding or something like that. Anyway, I sort of recommend it. It was sweet, but kind of forgettable in the end. Also, this had like dual narrator as well, which again really nice. The guy sounded a lot like Martin Freeman, at least on 1.75 speed. He sounded like Martin Freeman, which was kind of fun.
The next book I read was Volume 1 of the Oxford Library of English Poetry, chosen and edited by John Wayne. I think all of this is like up to the 17th century, so a slog to get through. And I know that it's meant to be kind of like a reference, but there's like 200 pages of Shakespeare in here. And I've read Shakespeare before, and it's like excerpts from his plays too, and I'm like, I mean, it's technically poetry because it rhymes and it's in verse, but like, it's not really poetry. And he didn't write it to be read as poetry. And there's a few other people where it's like John Milton, he's included like 200 pages, and I'm just like, I can't. I really struggle with long poems to begin with. I skipped those. I'm gonna admit that there's like 300 pages of this that I did not read. I couldn't do it. There were some poems that I knew before that I liked to see in here. A few that I found that I had not known before, but then yeah, it was like in chronological order by author, their birth year, I believe. So, but then you'd have like massive sections for some people and then just one poem by someone else, which I thought, and I always think this in anthologies, I just don't think it's fair that you devote so much time to one person. Like, you can find Shakespeare at any shitty bookstore. Like, and I'm not saying that Shakespeare is shitty, I quite like him, but like, you can find copies of Shakespeare anywhere. Same with Milton, to be honest. But like, some of these other people are probably more difficult to find, so why didn't you do your homework and add more of them in here? Because that's kind of would have been interesting. I know that was maybe not the intention of this, but I just think it could have been better. Yeah, I think I gave it like 2 stars because I just found it so difficult to read. It took me 3 months. I started reading this in like May. So if that doesn't tell you anything, then I don't know what will. Hopefully the following 2 volumes, which I also own and will read, will be better because they'll be more modern. So I'll kind of, like, when spelling isn't standardized and stuff, it's really hard. It's just hard. And I'm already, like, reading is hard for me already. So it was just, no.
The next book I read was How It All Blew Up by Arvind Ahmadi. This follows Amir. The book starts with him being in an interrogation room at an airport after having had an argument with his family on an airplane. Basically, so the book is him explaining what happened leading up to the argument on the airplane, and basically what we find out, and this is not like a spoiler, this is basically on the back cover, is that he was blackmailed by someone at his school because he's gay, and obviously because his family is like not welcoming to that, he decides to run away to Rome. As you do. And then he spends like the summer there, more or less. Like, I think he spends like 3 months there, getting to know like other gay people and falling in love and like realizing who he is as a person, free of like the constraints of being in his small town where he can't be open, and with his family who he can't be open with either. I thought it was pretty good. It was kind of funny, you know, it was nice to see him kind of flourish as a person. There was some aspects that I didn't necessarily like. Obviously, like, I thought Amir was like, I understand to some degree why he couldn't be honest with the people in Rome, but also I was like, sometimes I was like, this is your own fault. Like, if you would have just explained some stuff. Overall, I thought it was pretty cute. The ending was pretty sweet as well. So I would recommend, you know, if you want like an easy breezy book to read. So, like some of the chapters that are like interrogation room are like very easy to read, so it's very quick.
The next book I read was La Femme aux deux sourires by Maurice Leblanc. This is another one where Arsène Lupin he like sees a woman. I don't remember the exact context of where he sees her, but he like becomes friends with her, or he follows her somewhere, and she's like in trouble. In the past, a woman was murdered and her valuables stolen, and no one knows where the valuables went, like her jeweled necklaces and stuff, and also no one knows how she was murdered. It's like there's like evidence of a burn on her, but like she was in plain view of like 30 people, and they don't know how she was killed. Fast forward to like 30 years later, this old man he like bought the house where she was murdered, and he was in love with her, but he had affairs with other women, and this woman turns out to be his daughter. But he doesn't tell her that. He somehow knows, or like the letter that the mom wrote to him after she, like before she died, is all a little bit confusing. But anyway, Arsène Lupin involves himself in some way. She's also, the police are trying to catch this woman because she was the mistress of some gangster, but it's really confusing. And then it turns out that it's two different women. There's one woman who was actually this gangster's mistress for a little while, and she's like not a great person, and there's a lot of like very puritanical, judgmental stuff about her. Like her mother died when she was young, and the only way that she could support herself was prostitution, and like it's made out to be like a huge horrible thing that she's done. It's like that's how life is for people who are poor and maybe don't have access to like family who will help them in the 30s. Like what else is she gonna do? And then this other woman is like, she's completely innocent, but she's being hounded by the police. Turns out they're half sisters. That guy, he fathered both of them, but he doesn't realize that there's two of them. It's like really confusing. I don't really understand how the ending happened. Like Arsène Lupin's like, oh, there were two of you, and he like doesn't talk to either of them again. That happens at the end of a lot of these books, where he's like being in love with one of them the whole way through, and at the end it's like, okay, goodbye now. I was like, why? You could have hung out with them. He could have created a life with one of them if he wanted to, but he chose not to, or he like for some other reason is like called away, and it's all a little bit like, okay, whatever. Like I'm not that emotionally invested in it, but it doesn't make any sense. But I think it's described in one of the books. He says that every time he takes on a new name, he feels like a completely different person.
Oh, I see.
So, like, every time he's, like, falls in love with a new woman, it's because he's a completely different person than who he was in, like, the previous book, kind of.
course.
Which doesn't make any sense, but I'll let him have it if he wants.
The next book I read was May the Best Man Win by C.R. Elor. This follows... Every time I'm struggling hard. Jeremy and Lucas. Jeremy has just come out as trans, and he broke up with Lucas because they used to date before he started transitioning. They are both gonna run for the homecoming king thing. This is very American, so it's like I don't really understand a lot of stuff that happened in this book, like related to high school. I was like, what? Anyway, Jeremy is doing it because he wants the school to see him as a real man, and Lucas is doing it because he has a lot of pressure on him from his family because his older brother died quite recently, and he feels like if he doesn't become homecoming king and do all that, he's not gonna get the love from his family, basically. And also it's good for university, apparently.
Why?
I don't know. Nothing makes sense.
Okay.
Anyway, so they kind of go up against each other, and then obviously their kind of history influences some of the decisions and so on and so forth. And I thought overall it was pretty good. I did think, because they're like obviously opponents, they kind of like sabotage their like campaign. High school, I just don't understand it. Anyway, and I thought some of the sabotages, like if this had happened to me, I would never have forgiven this person probably, or like it would have taken a lot of groveling from the other person for me to forgive them. Because some of them are just like, wow, that's a lot. That kind of was one aspect I thought like the author could have like held it back a little bit. Like it's only high school, it's not that serious.
It's like in movies, you know, where they do things and you're like, I would report you to the police for this.
Yeah.
Sorry, but
exactly. It was just like some of that I thought was a little bit over the top. Things that I did like about the book was like understanding both Jeremy and Lucas like inner thoughts, like what they were going through. That was like the best part of this book, I think, because like Jeremy, he lashes out a lot, but it was kind of interesting to like understand why. And I read like a review that kind of explained it quite as well. That I thought was good. So it was like nice to have like that perspective as well. It was quite good. Recommend if you want to read about homecoming kings. I like have no.
I have no idea.
Same. I was just like, some of it was just, it sounded so big, and like I was like, they do this every year? Like, when do they have time to study? All of that was just a lot. But I was like, oh, this is interesting to understand another culture. That's kind of what it felt like.
Like an anthropologist.
Yeah, basically. It was okay. This was one of the most anticipated reads of the year, but it kind of fell a little bit short. Thought it was going to be a little bit more heavy on romance than it ended up being.
The next book I read was the collected poetry of Rupert Brooke, who was a World War I poet and who died during World War I. I had read some of his poetry before, and I had also read poetry that someone else had written about him. And I knew he was probably at least bi, because some of his poetry is very homoerotic. And also because some of the other gay poets from World War I talked about him a lot. He was also super hot. We'll put the picture because he was like apparently the hottest man in England at the time. Multiple people said this at the time, said that he was like...
Was he like the Henry Cavill of this time?
Yeah, he's just like, he is, I agree that he's good looking, but apparently he was like a superstar. Everyone loved him. Everyone thought he was really good looking. In terms of his poetry, however, some of his earlier stuff, like pre-World War I didn't really have a lot of emotional impact on me, basically. It's kind of like, it felt like he didn't really have his heart in it when he was writing it, so it's kind of like, I'll just write it because people want me to do something. There's like a story apparently where he went skinny dipping with, was it Vita Sackville-West? And then his World War I poetry, there was a lot less of it than I actually thought. I had read almost all of it already, so I was kind of like, oh, I thought he had written loads more, but he actually only wrote like 5 or 6 poems during that period. And I had read like 4 of them already. It was a little bit of a letdown in that sense because I was expecting more. Also because the collection was actually, so it was published like the year of his death. And then they did like a reprint in 95. And I expected, and at the time in like 1917, I was not expecting them to bring out the gay aspect. But then in 95, I maybe would have expected it more, and I didn't get it from that at all. So at the end of this book, they included also other poems that were written about him after his death, basically, or to him. And they didn't include the one that I remembered, which was kind of sounded like a lover's poem. And I kind of was very disappointed by that because it felt like a huge part of why I connected to him. And then it was like not included at all. And then as I was trying to read up later on him, I found out he was apparently a huge anti-Semite, which really dragged it down for me, obviously. He was also a misogynist. So there's that. His poetry was good. Okay, it was okay. Like the World War I poetry that was about actually being a soldier was heartbreaking, as most of the World War I poetry is. I kind of almost wish that I hadn't even looked him up afterwards and found out about this, because it made me really sad about it and like it less. I don't think I could really say that I noticed anti-Semitism in the poetry, so there is that, I guess. But like, it's not nice to know that he was a bad person. after you read something that you kind of liked.
The next book I read was the volume 8 of Jujutsu Kaisen called Inventory, and this is by Gege Akutami. Yes, so I skipped volumes 2 till 7. Basically, one of my friends said that you could probably skip and just read where, you know, the anime ends. And to be fair, from reading the first volume, it follows the manga and anime are very close. So I figured, why not? I just don't have the energy to like, because I did that with like One Punch Man. I like literally read volume 1 up until wherever it is now, and you know, it takes a lot of time to read, obviously. And if it follows it closely, then you know, why not? So this has a bit of the end from the anime, and then it kind of starts a new storyline. And the new storyline follows one of my favorite characters, Goju. He's my boyfriend. Kind of like his past, because he's like one of the best sorcerers in the current timeline, and he also teaches at the Jujutsu Kaisen Academy. So this follows him when he's like a first or second year student, and they basically have to get this girl who's gonna like become a vessel for someone, and then she's being like pursued by these two groups who wants to like take her for their own. I thought it was interesting to like read the past of what happens, get to know some characters who have kind of introduced at the end of the anime and are now in this storyline. I thought that was really interesting. There's not much to say. Like I think like 4 of the 7 chapters were this new storyline. Recommend the anime and the manga. It's good. Read it.
The next book I read was Victor de la Brigade Mondaine by Maurice Leblanc. It's another Arsène Lupin book. I read these pretty fast because I listen to them and I just kind of scroll along. They're all available online for free, including the recordings. So, like, I can listen to one of them in like 2 days, basically. So that's why I got through them so fast. This one, I don't really remember what happens. There's like bank bonds that are stolen and everyone thinks it's Arsène Lupin who stole them, but they keep turning up and then disappearing in the hands of like completely inept criminals. So like one person has them and everyone's like, but he couldn't have masterminded this, but then they were stolen from him and then they're stolen from the next guy, and they're all like kind of normal people who you wouldn't expect to have stolen from a bank or something. Victor de la Brigade Mondaine is like the police inspector who's trying to figure this out, and there's like this Russian princess or something. I don't really remember what her involvement is. It's like kind of implied that she maybe committed a murder when they were stolen the last time, and then the bonds go missing, and and now they're trying to solve this murder of this guy, and there's like feuds between families, and then what happens? Oh, and then it's revealed that Victor is Arsène Lupin. And it kind of ends like that, and he like finds the bonds, and then he's like, okay, goodbye everyone, I'm leaving. And the Russian princess was like an adrenaline junkie, so she just like would show up to places where she thought crimes would happen, because she wanted to see them. But yeah, it didn't make any sense. I keep saying that about these books, and it's always true. It didn't feel very innovative, and it didn't really capture my imagination. I mean, of course he's the chief inspector, like, that's what I was expecting the whole way through, and then it was revealed at the end, and it was like, am I supposed to be surprised? It wasn't great. 2 stars.
The next book I read was Gay Bar, Why We Went Out by Jeremy Atherton Lynn. And this is kind of like a memoir slash like a history of gay bars in the UK and US. It was quite interesting to like learn about like the history and like why they were important for like the gay culture, especially obviously when I say gay in this, I mean gay men. The author is gay as well, so it's obviously like important to him and his identity as well. But it was quite interesting. This obviously has a lot of like mentions of gay sex and like that kind of stuff, which, you know, understandable. This is what that's culture is not about, but like his life as a gay man is features a lot of that. I thought overall it was pretty interesting to learn like the history and important like places in the US and the UK that have like had this. And I think at the end of the book they go to like Blackpool, which is a poor area here in the UK, and but has like quite a few gay bars, which is quite interesting, and you know what that identity means for like the place and for the people who live there. I recommend it. The audiobook is narrated by the author as well, which is quite nice, and he had a pretty good voice as well. Sometimes when author narrates their own books, I'm like, mate, you should not have narrated this. I would like to have like a physical copy of this book because I want to know if there's like pictures in it, which might give a little bit more context to what some of these places look like. I gave this like a 4 out of 5 stars, I think.
The next book I read was War of the Beasts and the Animals by Maria Stepanova. This was originally written in Russian and then it was translated by Sasha Dugdale. From the introduction, I gather that Sasha Dugdale and Maria Stepanova spent a lot of time together making it work in English. These were very long poems, and as I mentioned, it's very hard. I can't. I mean, I did read all of it, and it helps that it's not a whole huge block of text. There were like breaks and like empty lines and stuff, which definitely helps me personally. I think a lot of it I did not understand, and I don't know if that's because I don't have the cultural context of Russia. I mean, I kind of vaguely know about Russia, but I don't know that much. And also, like, some of it I was just like, it's not for me. I just don't get it, or it's not the type of poetry that I enjoy. But there were some portions that I really liked. Some of this poetry had been written in Russian several years ago, and then it just came out in 2021, this English version. So I think it will kind of be interesting to see maybe how the poetry has been translated by other people, or maybe some of her other poetry as well. As it was, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite. And also, I don't know how much Sasha Dugdale infused of their own twist on it, which is always a danger when you're reading translated stuff, especially poetry. You know, I mean, I can't actually read Russian, so this is the only way that I can access it. Kind of, some of it was quite subversive, I think, especially for, like, Russia. So, kind of interesting, because she's, like, super acclaimed in Russia, but a lot of it was very critical, which is an interesting dynamic, I think.
The next book I read was Perfect on Paper by Sofia Gonzalez. I had previously read her first book, Only Mostly Devastated, which it was okay. However, this one I really enjoyed. So this is about Darcy, who has a locker at her school where people can like leave letters asking for relationship advice, and then she'll tell them what to do basically. And then one day this guy named Alexander finds out that she has a locker because he wants like relationship advice but like face to face. And so he's like, well, I'll pay you like a lot of money for you to like help me. And she's like, okay. The main character also has a crush on her best friend Brooke, so it's kind of like about that. And Darcy is bi. Yeah, I thought overall this was really good. I like that the guy, because I mean there's not like a massive surprise, but she kind of falls for the guy, or if it is, sorry, but I thought it was interesting because he was very kind of like not like the standard typical like romance interest in that way. He was kind of difficult, and like she didn't really understand everything that he was talking about. The communication between the two sometimes didn't really match perfectly and stuff like that. So I thought that was really interesting, that he was just not like the dream guy, that he was, you know, a bit difficult and things like that. But yeah, I recommend reading this. I thought it was good. It was interesting to read an LGBT book where the bi person falls for a guy rather than like a girl, because usually it's like they go for like the gay option in that sense. I recommend it, and it was really well written, I thought, as well. It's definitely like a step up from the previous book, which I thought was like fine, but it felt a little bit like juvenile, whereas this one felt a bit more like mature. I mean, they're still high schoolers, but like what I mean is like the way it was written felt more like leveled up. Read it. I recommend it. By main character, stamp of approval.
The next book that I read was La Cagliostro Sauvage by Maurice Leblanc.
What?
So in this book, Arsène Lupin follows a man into a bank, and the man really secretively takes out like a bunch of money from his like lockbox. Not from, he doesn't have like an account, but it's like cash that he has in like a safe there, and he takes it all out, and then he like follows him to his home, and then he kind of ingratiates himself with them, and turns out the house next door is on sale, and he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll steal his money and use it to buy the house. Perfect, problem solved. And this guy has like 2 nieces who live in this other house with him. And then he's like, I need to refurbish my house. So one of his friends from a previous book is like, oh, here's a guy you could use. He's like recently an architect, but he has no family, so no one to really introduce him to the right people. So maybe you could employ him. So he does. And then one of the nieces is murdered. And there's like theft happening also, and then it turns out that the guy who murdered her was actually trying to save her because she was standing on like the pontoon over a river, and the pontoon like legs had been sawed so that she would fall in when she stood on it, and the guy was trying to save her, but she ended up dying anyway. And then he stole her necklace. So there's like a whole bunch of like shenanigans about who killed her, and like someone else got attacked, and then another guy is murdered, and like there's like sordid like affairs were happening in the past, so the nieces are like actually possibly half sisters or something. And then from one of the previous books, La Comtesse de Cagliostro, that book ends with Arsène Lupin marrying this woman, and then the Comtesse de Cagliostro, she vows to defeat them one day. But this is like 20 years in the past at this point. And she actually, what she had done in that book, which I had completely forgotten, is that she steals their son. When he's a baby, like the baby is born and then the mother dies during childbirth, I believe. And the Countess steals the baby. And it's kind of not discussed again for the other books in between. And so I forgot about it. And then they were like, actually, one of these guys is your long lost son. And she raised him to be like a bad person to get her revenge on you, which makes no sense. Or she had someone else raise him to become like a criminal. Except that all of the proof of this was destroyed. So we don't know whether he's actually his son or if it's just some dude. And we don't find out at the end of the book. And Arsène Lupin doesn't even care. He's like, oh, well, you know, like, if he's my son, that's great. And if he's not, then I don't care. And it's like, this was a child that was stolen from you. Like, he was kidnapped as a baby from you. Like, even if it's not him, do you not feel some kind of connection to him? No. He doesn't. It ended kind of strange, and then there's like, he has an affair with one of the other women who's involved, who's apparently super beautiful. He names his villa after her in like the south of France. I don't know. He like meets up with her 6 months later, and she's like, how can you prove to me that you have thought of me all this time? And he's like, I'll bring you to my villa. And she's like, okay. So she goes, and he's just like, ta-da! I named it after you. And she's like, I don't care. I don't give a shit about that. But I also bought the statue of you that sculptor had made. As if that's not the creepiest thing ever. And she's like, okay, you did love me. And they hang out there for a while. It makes no sense. That's how the book ends. That's how the book ends. I don't know how much commentary I can really provide for this, because it just is so completely strange and not good that there's nothing more to say. It's just kind of like, if I tell you what the book is about, then you're like, oh, I get why it's so silly, because the plot is so weird.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're nearly at the end of these books, and then you'll never have to hear me talk about them again.
The next book I read was Neon Gods by Kate Robert. This is a kind of smutty retelling of Hades and Persephone. We had some technical difficulties. We're back. Neon Gods by Katie Robert, set in modern day US in a town called Olympus, which is split in half, and you have the upper city and the lower city. And Persephone is unexpectedly thrust into an arranged marriage to Zeus, which she doesn't want, so she runs away to the lower city where she meets up with Hades, and they form an alliance to overthrow, kind of, Zeus. She basically wants out of Olympus because for some reason she can't escape even though she's 24. Yeah, so she forms this alliance, and basically part of it is that they will have like a fake relationship to like prove to Zeus that she's spoiled. Like not in like she's a spoiled little girl, like more like she's spoiled fruit.
Ew.
Kind of.
Like,
By having public sex in Hades' sex dungeon.
what?
I know, this is all very strange. And she has to spend 3 months with Hades, because when she turns 25, which is 3 months later, she gets some money and then she can leave Olympus. This is all very strange. The world building in this book was not very good. All the names of the gods, like the 13 gods, so you have like Demeter, Zeus, Hades, Hermes, Dionysus, they're like roles or like politician of like school, but not, it doesn't like, I mean Demeter I guess is like food, which implies that they are born with other names, but that's never mentioned. So Hades is always Hades even though surely that's not his name. Characterization is very strange, they're all really flip-floppy. Even the smut wasn't very good. Like, I could disregard everything else if the smut had been good, but it was not. It was just not well written. My Goodreads review for this was corpse husband voice, man what the fuck.
Man, what the fuck?
Also, this only takes place during the, like, so she's supposed to stay there for 3 months, but this takes place during the first month. So, like, all of a sudden, within a month, they are, like, super in love and, you know, cannot live without each other. I would have liked to see it for 3 months for them to develop their feelings, and maybe they're, like, you know, pining, but they're having sex, and it's awkward, and all that stuff. But it was just, like, a month, and then the book was kind of over. Because that, I thought would have been interesting if, like, it came up to, like, the end of 3 months, and then you have the pressure from Zeus and the upper city, but also, like, she's about to get her money, but what does she decide to do?
The final book that I read this month was Les Milliards d'Arsène Lupin by Maurice Leblanc. It's also the last book in that series, so no more after that. This one was kind of different. It was published after his death, so I don't know if they had to like do a bunch of editing without him or what, but so it's kind of partially set in New York, and there's this upstanding citizen who decides to use the American mafia to take down the biggest criminal that exists, which is apparently Arsène Lupin, who doesn't even operate in the US. So he's like, I'm gonna employ the mafia. And he kind of vaguely alludes to his secretary who works for him and who happens to have previously had an affair with his son. So she has a child from this guy, but he abandoned her. He like alludes to this, and he's kind of like, you need to finish what I've started if I die. And immediately he dies, and she's like, I need to go to France to figure out what he was up to, because he was going to go to France. So she goes, and there's a bunch of shenanigans. There's this guy who's trying to either kill her or fuck her, unsure. It could be both. He's like really into her, but he's also like a huge creep. There's a big tiger at one point that escaped from the circus, and she like helps it, and then it's like does her bidding. It's weird. It's really confusing. But so Arsène Lupin thinks that the tiger ate her, but it actually ate someone else. And this someone else sacrificed herself so that the other woman would be okay. The whole point of this was that they were going to take Arsène Lupin's money, and there's a big confrontation in a bank and stuff, and of course Arsène Lupin wins. The story was fine, kind of, like, a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. And then the ending was really, really disappointing because, as we know, Arsène Lupin always falls in love with the woman.
Yes.
And she fell in love with him back, and he got on with her son as well, who's like 8 years old at this point. And they're like on the boat back to New York. And he's like, yes, I love you. You know, we could build a life together. And she's like, yes, I would build a life with you. And then shenanigans. And then at the very end, he's like, great. You should get ready to get married. And she's like, great, I'm ready to marry you. And he's like, no, it's not with me. It's that guy who you had an affair with, whose son is, like, your son is also his son. He's agreed to divorce his wife and marry you instead. And she's like, but I don't want that. And he's like, that's the deal. And that's how the book ends. It makes no sense. I know I keep saying this, but it just doesn't. Why would you do that? Because he was like, oh, well, your son could never have a normal life if he takes on my name. First of all, her son does not have to take his name. Secondly, they were gearing up to be very happy together. I don't know. It just was a really weird ending for kind of like the quality had declined quite a lot in the books, the later books. But yeah, now I don't have to think about it ever again.
The next book I read was volume 1 of Chainsaw Man, called Dog and Chainsaw by Tatsuki Fujimoto. And this was on recommendation from a friend of mine who has read it and liked it. So I thought, why not? And it's becoming an anime as well by one of my favorite anime studios called MAPPA, who also did, well, they did Jujutsu Kaisen, I think, as well, and Yuri on Ice. So this follows the story of, I think he's a teenager at least, who owes a lot of money to the mafia. Well, his dad did, and then his dad is dead, so now he's inherited the debt. And so he tries and, like, get as much money as he can. He's, like, sold his eye previously and stuff. And so he makes a deal with this little devil, and this world has devils. A devil who's like inhabited this like toy dog and who has a chainsaw through his face. And they make a deal, and so when he pulls on a string on his heart, he turns into Chainsaw Man. And then he's kind of captured, sort of, by this police institute thing that basically patrols Tokyo to make sure that like the devils are kept in order. Yeah, it's kind of sad. Like, obviously the main character hasn't really experienced all the things because he's like lived in severe poverty because of his debt. It's kind of sweet. I'm probably gonna read more of it, I think, and I will definitely watch the anime. It's really well drawn. Also, in this world, the Soviet Union still exists and the Holocaust has never happened. I'm not sure how or if ever it will play into the storyline. Because sometimes that's just like the world that they've decided on for some reason.
Well, that was all of the books that we read this month, which is a lot. I think that was our most productive month ever. Thanks for watching.
Yes.
Let us know what you thought about our books. Kind of an eclectic mix this month. And yeah, what are you reading? What do you want to read? What should we read? Comment down below.
And like and subscribe,
Yes.
Of course.
And come see us on other social media platforms, such as Instagram, where we are more active than elsewhere. And we'll see you soonish, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Hej då!
Bye!
Excuse me.